We will now move on to the House of Delegates race District 12, Democratic candidates. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to give their opening remarks. In alphabetical order, we will begin with Dario Broccolino.
Hello, I'm Dario Broccolino, candidate for the House of Delegates in the 12th District. I currently serve as the state's attorney for Howard County, and I've been in that position for 12 years. I have one principle in running the state's attorney's office, and it has led to our office being recognized as one of the best, if not the best in the state, and that is just do the right thing. We impress that on all our prosecutors. I want to go to Annapolis just to do the right thing for you.
Eric Ebersole.
Thank you. I'm Eric Ebersole. I'm currently serving in the House of Delegates in District 12. I was elected in 2014. After 35 years of service here in Howard County as a public school teacher, I was eager to move on and broaden my influence, and that has been something that I have drilled down on quite strongly. Public education is a major factor. Certainly, I care about issues like the environment, health care, even Maryland's economy and creating jobs. But in the end, I think that education is the thing that will build our future. I think it's very important for us to focus on it. I think it's very important for us to fund it fully. Thank you.
Jessica Feldmark.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Feldmark, and I'm running to be delegate in District 12 because I believe so many things important in our community: public education, civil rights, voting rights, workers' rights, reproductive freedom, environmental protection. So many of the rights and principles that are fundamental to our society and our well-being are under attack and at risk. And I want to serve as your next delegate to fight to protect those rights and continue to push Maryland forward to be a leader in the values that matter most to us. Thank you.
Malcolm Heflin.
Hello, for those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Malcolm Heflin, and I'm a candidate for the House of Delegates in District 12. Just a little about me. I've lived in Maryland for just over 10 years. I'm a 12-year Navy vet. And the Navy is what brought me here to Maryland. The reason why I'm running is because I want to do my part to make a change. I want to be a change agent here in the state and here in our country. So often when you talk to people, and so often when I go around and canvass people and talk to people, they talk about how they want to bring a change. They feel like their officials don't hear them out. And I want to be sure to bring that spirit of change and representation to Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry Hill.
Morning. I want to thank again the League of Women Voters for hosting this. My name is Terry Hill, and I'm running for re-election in District 12. I currently serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee. I grew up in Howard County and a physician and have been in practice now for almost 27 years. And it is my ability to listen, to analyze problems, and to come up with solutions that care about the people and look for equity that I think make me an outstanding candidate for this district, and I hope to have the opportunity to go back and continue moving the state forward, particularly in these difficult times. Thank you.
James Howard.
I'm James Howard, and I'm running for delegate in District 12. I'm a recognized expert. I'm James Howard, and I'm running for delegate in District 12. I'm a recognized expert in public policy design and implementation, and about half that experience has been on flood protection and recovery. Since I began this campaign, one of the key elements of my campaign has been talking about environmental protection and the concerns we have with that, and we've been reminded of that again in the last week. As my heart breaks for the people in Ellicott City who've lost their livelihood and the man who lost his life, but as we continue to send the same thinking back to Annapolis, we're going to get the same results back. I'm running to bring data-driven expertise to Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Weaver.
Hello, my name is Mark Weaver, and I'm a longtime resident of this district. I'm running for delegate in District 12. Longtime small business owner, blue-collar Democrat, and longtime Democratic activist. For 7 years, I ran our local Democratic club, where we held forums like this, helped elect good Democrats, and occasionally reminded them of their democratic values. Now I want to go to Annapolis to work for you. My name is Mark Weaver. Thanks.
Thank you for those opening statements. Let's begin our question session. If you would like to respond, please hold up your card so that I can call on you in the order in which I see the cards. You will have 1 minute for each response. A timekeeper is sitting in the front row to let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. Question 1. Do we need high-speed transportation between Baltimore and Washington? If so, what would that look like and how would you fund it? Mr. Weaver.
Well, we do obviously need it. I have to admit, it's tough for the state to fund light rail. If we can build a consensus, it might take a referendum to do it, then it's a good idea. We need it. We will have it eventually. Until we build that consensus politically, I think we need to improve our bus service. It's an unglamorous solution, but we need it anyway to connect this high-speed transit. When we get it, we're still going to need a bus service that people want to ride, and that's dedicated lanes, it's improved buses, and we need to make it so people want to ride the bus, that it's not the very last resort. So that's how we start to fix this problem. It'll take a while. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Howard, Ms. Hill, Mr. Ebersole, and Ms. Feldmark, in that order.
I want to make sure this one's working. We need high-speed rail from Richmond to Boston. So the part from DC to Baltimore is obviously necessary too. But we also need better public transportation throughout Maryland. We need to make sure that the transit systems in Baltimore go to where the jobs are and start where the housing is. We need to make sure that the public transit in Howard County can go to jobs and goes to our homes. These are things that they're not necessarily doing now. We need to link development and transportation policy together so that when we build a new rail line, we know that's where we're going to be building new houses. At the same time, earlier this week, I spoke to somebody in Lansdowne who was telling me that it takes 2 hours to get from his home to his job in Catonsville on the bus. That's unacceptable. Beyond high-speed rail, we need to make sure that the buses and train services we have actually meet people's needs.
I believe that we need to have a deeper and broader mass transportation system, particularly between Washington and DC, but whether or not high-speed rail is a solution, I don't think that really is. I think it is true that we need it along the Atlantic corridor, but we've got Amtrak, we've got Acela. Those things are there, but what we lack are the fundamental pieces that get the outburbs into the centers so that they can then make that transit. So I think with 20 years needed to build a robust transportation rail system and the need for maintenance, we need to put the horse before the cart and take care of the fundamental issues first and maybe begin planning for it, but I'm not in favor of the maglev at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Ebersole, Ms. Feldmark, Mr. Heflin, and Mr. Broccolini, in that order.
Thank you. The high-speed train thing is a sexy concept. The maglev or the hyperloop sound really cool. You can get to Washington really fast. I concern myself with accessibility. Something like this will be tremendously expensive and accessible perhaps only to people who have the means to use it. What I think we should be focusing on instead is regular transportation between Baltimore and Washington. For example, I believe that the MARC train should run almost like a subway every 30 minutes. So all you have to do is show up at a MARC station, and you will find that a train will come in less than 30 minutes and take you. This would make it something that's reliable and accessible. As for accessibility, at the same time, if we are going to begin to increase our public transportation between Baltimore and Washington, we need to focus on the last mile. Our parking lots are jammed at these stations now, and some of the stations, and others not. But we need to find better ways, bike shares, and many other ways to get people from the station to their house or from their house to the station to make them accessible. Thank you.
I find myself agreeing with much of what's been said. I do think that high-speed connections between Baltimore and Washington are a great long-term goal, but we have much to do in terms of improving existing service, whether that's expanding the existing MARC service, decreasing, having more trains run more regularly to decrease the wait times, extending hours of service so that folks don't get stranded when they have to work late. That's critical. As well, I think we should be exploring bus rapid transit to increase our capability without huge infrastructure investments. We need to look at public transportation, both local and regional, as a way to decrease dependency on single occupancy vehicles. And to do that, it needs to be reliable and convenient. We need to make significant investments in improving the quality, reliability, and convenience of the service so that folks will be able to be riders of choice rather than having it simply be a transportation means of last resort.
Personally, on as far as trains, I think trains are a good idea, and the idea of expanding the availability and the frequency of the MARC train running is a great idea. I would just like to highlight this one point. Whatever public transit system we have should be, as was said in the question, should be well integrated between DC and Baltimore. DC and Baltimore operates like a metroplex, so there are many people who live in one part of this area and work in another, and it'll cut down on the traffic that we all are very aware of around here. I will also say this. I'm sure many people understand that there seems to be an attempt to try to shift the focus away from Baltimore down closer to DC. And we've noticed that in some of the public transit policies that have been adopted over the last couple of years that have become all the more apparent. I would like to caution that roll away. Baltimore is the economic engine of this state. It will be. And we want to make sure that when people are going to and from Baltimore to work, that is as easy as possible to do. It's great for economic development for all involved. Thank you.
Thank you. I think an important part of transportation, we have to look at some of the smaller issues first, like how to get from West Columbia to East Columbia, let alone go from from Baltimore to DC from this area. I'm not for building any more high-speed rails and whatnot, because it's just not going to happen. We can't afford it. I mean, that's the fact of life. If we're going to build more lanes on the highways, we should make them dedicated bus lanes or transit lanes. We cannot, look, it's just not going to happen. I love the idea of having a maglev train between Washington and New York with stops along the way here, but it's just not going to happen, folks. Let's look at these things realistic and look at what we can actually afford. We can do things. We need regular transit between where people live and where people work. We have to focus on getting people to the job and employment centers. Thank you.
Next question. Like the rest of the country and across income and class lines, Howard County is experiencing an opioid crisis, including the abuse of prescription drugs. What do we need to do to effectively respond to this crisis? Mr. Broccolini and Mr. Howard.
It's Broccolino.
I apologize.
That's okay. I've been called worse.
I apologize, Broccolino.
But, it is Broccolino. The opioid, we're making some progress on that line, believe it or not. The key is education, providing treatment facilities for people who need it. I'm the elected state's attorney, and I'm the only elected state's attorney in this state that deals with the drug court and the DUI court personally. I go into that court, every time it's in session to try to provide ways to help these folks who have these addiction problems, whether it be drug or alcohol. And I can tell you personally, that these programs work. When I say personally, I see it. I'm a teetotaler by nature, never acquired the taste for alcohol. But these programs work. We can do this. We're doing it. We're also educating the public at large. So I think we're on the way to getting a handle on this problem. But certainly, addiction services and education are the two keys that will help resolve this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Broccolino. Next, I saw Mr. Howard, Mr. Weaver, and then Mr. Ebersole.
We should remember that the opioid crisis right now is a public health crisis, and we have tools for monitoring public health crises. We have tools for monitoring influenza, avian flu, West Nile, Zika. We need to deploy these same tools to monitoring for outbreaks of opioid addiction because they are clustered geographically. And when a cluster pops up, we can send in help, medical help, social workers, and everything else we need to help those people. We also need to extend that training down to anyone who's willing to take it. I carry naloxone in my briefcase everywhere I go with me. But we also have to remember that a generation ago, when the opioid crisis hit, it was an African American problem, and there we treated it with the harshest criminal penalties we could muster. We need to go back and relook at that as we're remembering this time to treat white people better, that we need to go back and help those people put their lives back together, because after they were at their lowest point, the state broke them worse.
Mr. Weaver, Mr. Ebersole, Mr. Heflin, and Ms. Hill, in that order.
This issue is especially poignant for me. There's a lot of addiction in my family. I'm one of those families. And I wish we could just pass one law. There is no simple solution to this. It's important that when a person reaches their bottom, when they reach that point where, at least for a period of time, they truly see the problem and want to fix it on their own, that there's help there, whether it's in school, particularly in prison. It's crazy that we don't have a greater emphasis on drug rehabilitation in prison. You know, a lot of people go through their withdrawal by themselves, and sometimes that works. But the main thing is to have more treatment, and this goes hand in hand with greater mental health treatment in schools and in general. Our society needs it very badly.
Mr. Ebersole?
Thank you. I think I echo the words of one of the candidates for state senate when we have to recognize, and we finally are recognizing, that addiction's not an illegal act. And we treated it like that for so long. I'm disturbed that we treated it like that in the 1980s when crack cocaine was a problem. And we decided that the First Lady would say, just say no. And if you couldn't say no, then you were a criminal. And this really affected a certain segment of the population much more strongly than others that was unbalanced. Now that the problem has crept up into a different demographic in our society, now we're dealing with it correctly. Now we're starting to move toward it, and we have. We've, in the state legislature, instituted a prescription drug management program. We've given funding increases for more beds, and we've also done funding for naloxone to be available. This is the way to begin treating it, and we're not done. The problem's still there. We have lots of work to do. We've had lots of work to do for many, many years on many different drugs. I'm glad this one's getting the attention it deserves.
Thank you. Mr. Heflin, Ms. Hill, and Ms. Feldmark.
Well, a lot of the highlights have been covered, so I'll just emphasize this last point. Ultimately, addiction, and ultimately opioid addiction, is a public health problem, not a law enforcement problem. And any attempts to try to ramp up, trying to arrest our way out of this problem will not work. And anyone who tries to sell any solutions that involve trying to arrest our way out of this problem or trying to be punitive about it doesn't have an understanding of how addiction works and how we'll be able to solve this. Also, as has been said before, we need to be sure that all segments of the population are being treated equally. I mean, this is not just an issue of people of color, though for obvious reasons that's an issue that's close to my heart, but also even people who are lower income. People who are white, lower income, deal with many of the same problems, many of the disenfranchised problems. So efforts should be made to make sure that if someone wants to seek help and treatment for addiction, that all the resources are available for them, no matter where they are. Thank you.
So all of the above. First of all, opioids is just the latest addiction issue. You all remember heroin addiction and crack addiction and PCP and methamphetamines, and it won't be the last one. I think what's changed now is that we're finally recognizing on a large scale that this is a public health issue. So decriminalization, as has been previously said, recognizing that being an addict is not a criminal issue. So it really speaks to the failures of our society over the last several generations. And at the state level, we are trying to approach it, but it is a multifactorial, multi-year, multi-pronged approach. So we're dealing with the supply side. You heard about the prescription drug monitoring programs and many other things that we're doing. We're also trying to deal with it on the treatment side, and that's where funds are an issue. What is less being addressed is the demand side and the prevention side. And those are obviously much, much more complicated and more difficult, but those are the challenges that we have to address going forward. And one thing that will help is to try and get ibogaine research done. Ibogaine is known to break addictions
Thank you.
without long-term need for use.
Ms. Feldmark?
I think most of it has been said. I want to add a couple of points. Certainly, I agree with the general sentiment that this needs to be treated as an illness through treatment, and we need to have the resources dedicated to do that effectively. But part of the education, I think, needs also to be with the medical community and looking at pain management and how we got into this situation with overprescription of opioids for pain management. And that brings up another issue of medical cannabis and issues of access to alternative pain management treatments, since medical cannabis is not available through prescription coverage through insurance. Another thing I would just want to say on the issue of the newfound compassion for treating addiction, certainly previous crises were not handled appropriately, were not handled well, and I think we need to recognize that those prior mistakes have generational impacts, which we should be addressing as well.
Thank you. Final question. Maryland recently passed legislation requiring domestic abusers to turn in their firearms. How would you enforce this? Mr. Howard or Mr. Broccolino?
Some habits die hard.
It'll get better. Coincidentally, yesterday was National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and this is the Wear Orange weekend. So if you're wearing orange, good for you today. The problem we have in Maryland is that it's still too easy. Even in this left-leaning state, it's too easy to get our hands on a gun. We need to make sure that everyone who is going to get a gun is being run through the background check. We have to close every possible loophole because they do still exist in this state. We also need to make sure that when people are going to get a concealed carry permit, those are not handed out like candy. Those should be given out only in extreme cases where it's absolutely necessary. We also need to go further than protecting just those who are potentially victims of domestic abuse, although this is a huge problem. We need to make sure everyone is protected from gun violence, especially the children who are in our schools or on our streets in particular. So I was given a candidate of distinction rating by the Moms Demand Action for these reasons, because I've already laid out a comprehensive policy on this.
Mr. Broccolino, Mr. Heflin, and Ms. Feldmark.
Yeah, this is one of the better laws that was passed, this past legislation, and I think it's a separate law where a family member can advise the police that a person in the family is having a crisis and there are weapons, and the police can go and get these weapons. To me, that was the best law that could come out. I see, not every day, but I see often the tragic consequences of having a gun in the house when there's a domestic incident between them. They escalate very quickly, and unfortunately that gun is often used. But the police, and we're very lucky in Howard County, and I know a lot of the police officers in Baltimore County are ready to enforce this law. The prosecutors are behind it 100%. We can do this, and we can limit the number of guns out there by strictly enforcing this law, and hopefully reduce the number of fatalities. Thank you.
Mr. Heflin, followed by Ms. Feldmark, Mr. Ebersole, and Ms. Hill.
Within this, I just want to highlight two things that will actually make this more effective. And in maintain the effectiveness. One would be to ensure that law enforcement agencies maintain an adequate level of funding in order to do this. As anyone knows, with any kind of bureaucracy, especially any kind of government bureaucracy, one of the easiest ways to see a program get choked out or not to be effective is to basically make sure it is inadequately funded. It's important to make sure that if law enforcement organizations need to go get guns, that they are able to do that. And they don't have to worry about trying to scramble for it or trying to like cut back those kind of services. And ideally too, just greater efforts to try to harmonize or try to like, talk to our neighboring states. We have good gun control laws here in the state, but it's really easy to get guns in many surrounding states and just bring them back, which really doesn't do much to ultimately curb the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the members of our current delegation for supporting this bill and the many other gun control measures that passed this last session. For this particular bill, I do think a key piece of making it effective will be making sure that the local law enforcement agencies have the resources to be proactive in following up on making sure guns are actually removed from the home, making sure that there is follow-up on every registered weapon and making sure that they're checking for anything that may not be registered, any illegal weapons in the home. I think the many pieces of legislation that were passed were a very important effort, made some great progress, and they were piecemeal. And I've had conversations with members of the delegation. I don't mean that with any disrespect, but we need to work on a more comprehensive approach to gun control, and I look forward to being part of that effort. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to start by answering the question and then talk about other gun things. But it's not going to be a difficult law to enforce if we do have the resources. If you think about it, if there's a domestic abuser in a house, the other people in that household are going to be only too happy to have that weapon be removed from that household. And I think you'll find there'll be a great deal of cooperation on this matter. And so I feel that enforcement will be possible and probably quite successful. I will point out that from Moms Demand Action, I am endorsed as a gun sense candidate for my record in voting. We have passed a number of important pieces of legislation relevant to gun safety. We've outlawed bump stocks. We've actually tried to pass legislation, we successfully passed legislation to disband the Concealed Carry Review Board, which was a civilian board which was overturning almost every decision by the state police when reviewing whether people were qualified and able to carry a concealed weapon safely. We also passed legislation, as Mr. Broccolino said, relevant to having family members be able to alert the police if they felt there was a dangerous gun. But as Ms. Feldmark says, we have a long way to go, and we need to do it comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hill and Mr. Weaver.
So to piggyback on what's been previously said and to echo what my colleague Delegate Ebersole has said, we are certainly moving forward on a lot of areas with guns. There's more to be done, and you all know the politics of it, right? Just spent the last couple of weeks with a lot of fifth graders as they go through their simulated congressional hearings. And the question they want to know is why someone's individual Second Amendment right to carry a gun trumps their right to feel safe and their right to be safe, and why it trumps the common good. And I think what's clear, I say everybody up on this panel, is that we don't think it trumps the common good. And the challenge is to continue to layer on the laws that we need to layer on until we can have gun safety that is truly recognized throughout the state for all people. That means better database, better background checks, and better tracking of weapons that come in and out of the state.
Mr. Weaver?
To answer your question directly, it would have to be law enforcement, local law enforcement, that would retrieve the guns. It's one of many tough jobs that we ask them to do, and we should remember that. When we criticize the cops, I mean, it's warranted. They do represent all of us. But we should remember that in some ways it's an impossible job. We should appreciate the fact that people step up and do it. More generally, I think Maryland is obviously much better than most states, thanks partially to our incumbents here. I was very happy that the red flag law passed. I was surprised, and pleasantly so. I think that more generally we should license guns the way we license cars. They are at least as dangerous as an automobile and much less necessary for our daily life. So I think that's one common sense thing we can do. We'll know who has them, and it's easier to control.
Thank you. Each candidate will now have 30 seconds for their closing statements. In reverse alphabetical order, we will begin with Mark Weaver.
Well, hi there again. Thanks so much for this. This is the essence of democracy. Like I say, I've been a Democratic activist for a long time. I've sort of fallen in love with the system and how it works, and it's only been, that love has only grown as I walk door to door and act as a candidate. So please look at my beautiful literature, which has some of my recommendations. I'll boil it down to one for now, is campaign finance reform. My name is Mark Weaver, and I hope you'll vote for me.
Thank you. James Howard.
I want to first thank the League for hosting this forum. Unfortunately, we've only got to address a few questions here. There are many other great questions. If you go to my website, jameshoward.md, you can see comprehensive answers for many of them there. I've been to more than 5,000 doors since the beginning of February, talked to people, many, many homes, and they are not looking for someone who's going to be a part of the team. They're looking for someone who's going to give them solutions for their lives, their children's, and their future. Those are the kind of solutions I've been delivering for decades, and I want to do it for you. Thank you.
Terry Hill.
Thank you again for the forum and the opportunity. Again, my name is Terry Hill. I am currently serving in the House of Delegates in my first term. We've been doing a great deal to help move Maryland forward in a very difficult political environment. I would like the opportunity to continue along working with my colleague, Delegate Ebersole, and with Clarence Lamb. I think that listening is the key, and then thinking strategically about solutions to move us forward. All of these issues are important, and they all intersect, and the ability to dissect and understand how to negotiate solutions is an important one that I think I've already demonstrated. Thank you.
Malcolm Heflin.
I truly think that this is the greatest country in the world. And one of the greatest strengths of in our country is our sense of community, our sense that we can come together and collectively solve problems. What we elect our politicians to do ideally is to be almost like a focusing point, someone that, almost a platform where people can come and have their highest and best ideals realized and met and worked towards. I hope that if I'm sent to Indianapolis, that if you all send me to Indianapolis, that I can be that platform and that person to bring that change and to listen to you. Thank you.
Jessica Feldmark.
Thank you to the League for hosting and to everyone for being here today. I bring 22 years of public service experience to running for this position in a variety of nonprofit and government roles, including serving as Chief of Staff for former County Executive Ken Ullman and currently as County Council Administrator. So I have a deep understanding of the legislative process and all aspects of government operations, particularly how important it is for local governments and state government to work together. I hope to be able to focus on that in my new role, hopefully as your next state delegate. Again, Jessica Feldmark, thank you.
Thank you. Eric Ebersole.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure to serve for the last 4 years in the legislature. It has been the experience of a lifetime, and I'm eager to continue, and I'm eager for you to vote for me to do that. My voting record speaks for itself, but the endorsements I have, along with my teammates, Delegate Hill and Delegate Lamb, speak to that. We have teachers in both Baltimore and Howard County. We have unions, AFL, CIO, and SEIU. Environmental groups like Sierra Club and League of Conservation Voters and Clean Water Action have endorsed us, as well as we have received high rankings and endorsements from NARAL for women's issues. Finally, I'm proud to be endorsed by two stalwarts of Howard County, Liz Bobo and Frank Turner. Thank you very much.
Dario Broccolino.
Thank you. I've served on the legislative committee of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association for over 15 years. I've gone to Annapolis on a regular basis. I've testified before committees. I've seen how the sausage is made, and it's not always pretty. I started off by saying we want to just do the right thing. That's going to be the mantra of my service to you. In that regard, I have not taken any political contributions. I'm not taking any political contributions. I think they are a corrupting influence. Now, I don't mean to cast any dispersions on any of my fellow candidates who have taken contributions, but they are a corrupting influence. People before party.
Thank you. Thank you to all the candidates for District 12 House of Delegates.